I never imagined that I would one day sit down and recount a story that still leaves me breathless with shame, confusion, and disbelief. For most of my life, I believed my family was the safest place in the world. My marriage had been steady, predictable, and respectful, though never filled with the kind of passion one reads about in novels. My husband was a practical man, devoted to his work, and though he cared for us, he rarely expressed it in ways that felt tender or affectionate. Over the years, the silence between us grew louder. What began as small gaps, missed conversations, forgotten gestures, quiet evenings spent in separate corners of the house, turned into an emotional distance I could not bridge no matter how hard I tried. In that emptiness, my son grew into a young man. I was proud of him, not only for his achievements but for the way he carried himself with kindness and confidence. He noticed the things his father overlooked. When I seemed tired, he asked if I needed help. When I cooked, he always complimented me, something I rarely heard from my husband. What should have been ordinary moments of appreciation became lifelines to me, small sparks of warmth in an otherwise cold routine. I did not recognize at first how deeply I leaned on him. To me, he was simply attentive, caring, and present. When I felt lonely, I found myself turning to him for conversation. Our talks stretched late into the night. I would share thoughts I had never spoken aloud before, the disappointments in my marriage, the feeling that I had become invisible inside my own home. He listened with patience, with eyes that didn't judge, and with words that felt like balm on old wounds. At the time, I told myself this was harmless. What mother doesn't confide in her son, especially when she feels misunderstood by everyone else? But in the quiet corners of my mind, a faint unease grew. The comfort I felt with him was different, stronger, and far more consuming than it should have been. I brushed it aside, convincing myself that I was imagining things, that it was only the ache of loneliness twisting my perception. There were subtle moments that unsettled me. A glance that lingered too long. A compliment that felt almost intimate. A touch on my shoulder that made me pause and wonder why it stirred something deeper inside me. Each time, I silenced the thought, refusing to let it take shape. But in silencing it, I gave it more power. The more I ignored it, the stronger the pull became. Looking back now, I can see how the line between comfort and something forbidden was already beginning to blur. I was a wife craving tenderness, a woman longing to be seen, and in my vulnerability, I let my son's presence fill a void that should never have been his to fill. It began so quietly, so innocently, that I didn't even notice when admiration shifted into something dangerous. But deep down, I already knew a boundary was being approached, one that, once crossed, would change everything forever. It happened gradually, like water eroding stone, so subtle that I did not realize how far things had gone until the boundary was no longer ahead of me but already behind me. I remember the first moment when my heart truly faltered. I was sitting on the couch one evening, exhausted after a long day, when he sat beside me, closer than usual. His hand brushed against mine. It was accidental, perhaps, but instead of moving away, he left it there, the warmth spreading through me in a way that felt both soothing and unsettling. I should have pulled back, I should have reminded myself of who he was, but I didn't. I let it linger, telling myself it meant nothing. The truth is, it meant everything. From that night on, the way I looked at him began to change. When he smiled, I noticed the curve of his lips in a way I never should have. When he hugged me, I felt a rush of comfort so deep that it crossed into dangerous territory. I tried to justify it, reminding myself that I was starved of affection, that his kindness was filling a hole left by years of neglect. But inside, I knew I was letting temptation creep into places it didn't belong. One night, we sat talking after my husband had gone to bed. The house was quiet, the kind of silence where even whispers feel loud. I spoke about how invisible I had become in my own marriage, how I longed for a kind of closeness I had never truly known. His eyes held mine, steady and unflinching, and in them, I saw something I had been denying for months. It wasn't just sympathy. It wasn't just care. It was desire, unspoken but undeniable. My breath caught, and in that suspended moment, the world seemed to tilt. He reached for my hand again, and this time there was nothing accidental about it. The warmth of his grip made my heart race, and instead of pulling away, I tightened my fingers around his. Guilt surged immediately, but it was tangled with something intoxicating, a forbidden thrill that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. The first kiss was not planned. It was hesitant, trembling, as though we both knew how wrong it was but couldn't resist crossing that invisible line. My mind screamed against it, but my body betrayed me, leaning into the closeness I had craved for so long. That kiss shattered the last of the barriers I had tried so desperately to maintain. After that, nothing was the same. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with equal parts exhilaration and dread. I had done the unthinkable. I had crossed into a place where a mother should never go. The weight of it pressed down on me, and yet, in the quiet of the night, I couldn't deny the lingering warmth of what had happened. It was wrong. Every part of me knew it. But it was also irresistible, and that contradiction became the prison I could not escape. I told myself it was only a moment of weakness, that it would not happen again. But the more I tried to resist, the more I found myself pulled toward him, as if the very act of trying to stop only made the desire stronger. The line had been crossed, and once it was, there was no way to go back. I never imagined that I would one day sit down and recount a story as if every step I took carried the weight of my secret, confusion, and disbelief. Nothing seemed different. For most of my life, I believed my family was the safest place in the world. My household duties as my marriage had been steady, but inside, everything had changed. Though never each time I looked at my husband, one reads about in novels. My husband, if he could see it written on my face, devoted to his work, if he could sense and that I was no longer the woman he rarely expressed it in ways that felt tender or affectionate, remained over the years. The silence still buried himself in work and routine. What began never as noticing the storm that raged inside me, forgotten with gestures, my son, quiet evenings became spent in separate corners of the house, turned into an emotional distance. We behaved as if nothing had happened, how hard I tried. But every accidental touch, my son glance held to a young man, reminded us of what we had done, not only for his achievements but for the way he carried himself with kindness and confidence. Conversations that once his father over now carried an edge. When I seemed tired, every word lay a dangerous truth waiting to surface. When I cooked, I found myself living a double life I rarely heard from my husband. By day, what should have been ordinary moments of appreciation became lifelines to me. Small sparks of warmth my mind in an otherwise cold routine I should have buried. I did not recognize that made me feel both alive and ashamed on him. I was consumed by the thrill and the guilt, trapped between two opposing forces when I felt lonely. I found myself turning when I lay awake, convinced my husband would discover late into the night. The fear of being caught gnawed at me. I had never spoken a misplaced word, the disappointments in my marriage, at the wrong time, the feeling that I had become invisible inside my own home. Once, he listened my husband walked into the living room unexpectedly, and with words that felt like balm on old wounds. Terrified that he would notice I told myself this was harmless. The tension neither of us could hide. What mother doesn't confide in her son, especially when she feels misunderstood by everyone else, and returned in the quiet corners of my mind. I exhaled in relief, unease grew. But the close call left my hands with him was different, stronger, too, and far more changed in ways I couldn't ignore. I brushed it aside, convincing myself that I was imagining, as though guarding a secret that it was only the ache of loneliness twisting my perception. At other times, there were subtle moments that unsettled me, the same internal battle that lingered too long. His silence cut deep, that felt and I wondered if he regretted everything. A touch on my shoulder that made me cause of a mistake and wonder why it stirred something deeper inside me. The guilt followed me everywhere. I silenced the thought, a hug, refusing to let it take shape, a laugh, but in silencing it, I carried shadows now. Reminders of a line that had been broken, the stronger the pull became. I tried to convince myself to end it. I can see how the line between comfort and something forbidden was already beginning to blur. The more I tried to pull away, craving tenderness, the more the silence between us screamed with longing. And in my vulnerability, I began to hate myself. I let my son's presence for what had happened that should never have been his to fill. What I knew was forbidden. It began so quietly. I questioned the woman I had become, that I didn't even notice when admiration shifted into something dangerous. Every reflection in the mirror, I already knew a boundary was being approached. Someone who had traded honor for secrecy would change everything forever. It happened gradually. Despite the eroding stone, I could not bring myself that I did not realize how far things had gone until the boundary was no longer ahead of me, but already behind me. I knew it was only a matter of time before the weight of it all would force everything to collapse. I was sitting on the couch one evening, exhausted after a long day. When he sat beside me, they have a way of surfacing, of demanding to be seen. Against mine. For months I lived in constant fear, perhaps, and eventually instead of moving away, reality. He left it there. It wasn't a dramatic discovery in a way that felt both confronting and unsettling. No sudden revelation. revelation. I should have pulled back. It began I should have reminded myself of who he was. My husband noticed how quiet I became when our son was around, telling myself how our conversations seemed to stop the moment he entered the room. It meant everything. He started asking questions. From that night on, casual the way I looked at him began to change, probing in ways that made my stomach turn. I noticed the curve of his lips in a way I never should have, offering excuses. When he hugged me, masking my trembling with force so deep that it crossed into dangerous territory. I tried to justify it, too defensive, reminding myself that I was starved of affection. The more his kindness was filling a hole left by years of neglect. My husband grew colder, but inside, more watchful, I knew I was letting temptation it was only a matter of time before he pieced together what I had worked one night, so desperately we sat talking after my husband had gone to bed. One evening, the house when an was argument quiet, erupted the over kind of silence trivial, where even whispers his anger had been building for weeks. I spoke about how invisible I had become in my own marriage. He accused me of betrayal, how I longed for a kind of closeness I had never truly known. The truth buried his eyes held mine, steady, my heart pounded so violently I could barely breathe. I had been denying for months. To deny it again. It wasn't just to protect myself from the inevitable collapse, care, but the weight of desire, the secret crushed unspoken but undeniable. The words spilled out, my breath caught, broken, and in that suspended moment, the world seemed to tilt. The look in his eyes for my hand again will never leave me, and this time there was nothing accidental about it. And devastation, the warmth of his grip made my heart race. He demanded to know how I could do something so unthinkable. I tightened my fingers around how I could destroy not only our marriage but the very foundation of our family. With something intoxicating. His voice trembled with fury, and for the first time, alive in a way I had my actions had caused. The first kiss was not planned. It was unbearable. It was hesitant. In the days that followed, as though we both knew how wrong it was, but couldn't resist that had once been our safe haven became suffocating. My mind screamed against my husband withdrew, my body betrayed me, shutting me out with a wall of silence I had craved for so long. My son avoided that kiss shattered and the tension of the barriers I had tried was so desperately to maintain. Every room echoed after that with betrayal. Nothing was the same. Love that had once held us together lying awake shattered into fragments staring at that could never be put back. My heart pounding with I tried to mend the damage, but how does one repair something that was broken at its core? I had crossed into a place where a mother should never go. Promises to change came down on me. And yet, the trust in the quiet of the night, and in its place stood anger, the lingering warmth of what had happened. Too deep to heal. It was wrong. My family was no longer knew it, and I had no one to blame but myself. And that I often wonder what drove me to such recklessness. I told myself it was only a moment of weakness, the longing to be seen after years of being invisible. But the more I tried to resist, perhaps the more I found myself pulled toward him. But no explanation can erase the truth. Only made the desire stronger. I crossed a line that should never be crossed. The line had been crossed, and in doing so, and once I destroyed the very people I loved most. Now, when I look back, it isn't the passion or the fleeting comfort that I remember most. It is the silence that followed, the empty spaces, the broken hearts, the family that will never be the same. I live with that silence every day. It is my punishment, my reminder, and my greatest regret. If there is any lesson in my story, it is this: boundaries exist for a reason, and when they are broken, the cost is far greater than the momentary comfort they provide.